In this podcast episode, Tucker Carlson delves into the escalating violence and political unrest surrounding ICE protests in Minneapolis. The conversation explores the deeper demographic shifts driving the controversy over immigration enforcement, the depiction and reality of the so-called Great Replacement, and the broader cultural and racial tensions boiling over in America's urban centers. Carlson hosts interviews, including with a freelance journalist on the ground and a pastor from a church targeted by protesters, while analyzing the historical, social, and spiritual dimensions of the crisis. Carlson opens by describing Minneapolis as a city gripped by chaos and escalating violence rooted in anti-ICE protests. He situates ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as a flashpoint, a battleground over immigration, law enforcement, and ultimately, the question of who has authority over U.S. borders. The issue, he argues, transcends simple policy disputes and taps into anxiety over dramatic demographic changes underway in the United States, marked by a rapid decline of the white majority in major cities and growing immigrant populations. Addressing the widespread rejection of the Great Replacement theory by mainstream sources, Carlson critiques the automatic dismissal of the concept as a debunked far-right conspiracy. Using census data, he illustrates the sharp decline in the white population in America's largest cities since 1950, with New York's white population falling from 90% to around 30%. He emphasizes that these demographic shifts are real and measurable rather than imagined, and positions this mass population change as a deliberate process often orchestrated by political leaders to achieve power rather than happenstance. Carlson contextualizes demographic manipulation through history, referencing examples such as England's colonization of Ireland, where foreign settlers were intentionally moved in to change the cultural and religious makeup. He touches on global historical events, demonstrating how ruling powers have repeatedly reshaped populations, often forcibly, for control. This includes Mongol invasions and their demographic impact, as well as the displacement involved in the formation of Israel. The point is made that demographic transformation is rarely natural and often driven by leadership choices, not conspiracies, but historical fact. Delving into why governments would undertake such changes, Carlson highlights power as the primary motive. He discusses how immigration policies often serve political interests, citing statements like those from Stacey Abrams openly acknowledging the goal of building multi-ethnic coalitions that include undocumented immigrants to maintain electoral dominance. The economic rationale commonly presented is questioned, particularly in light of upcoming technological shifts like AI, which are expected to reduce labor needs, further underscoring the political over economic motivations behind mass immigration. Carlson reflects on the consequences of this rapid demographic replacement, pointing to the deterioration of once thriving cities such as Baltimore, Detroit, and Philadelphia. He contrasts the formerly majority white cities of the mid-20th century with their current states, suggesting immigration and demographic shifts have contributed significantly to urban decline, poverty, and loss of political balance. California's transformation into a state with high poverty and political one-party dominance is used as a cautionary example of what unchecked immigration and demographic change can produce. The podcast touches on election integrity concerns, noting that 14 states plus Washington, D.C. lack voter ID requirements, which Carlson claims facilitates voting by illegal immigrants. This, coupled with immigration-driven demographic shifts, is framed as a strategy for entrenched political power in certain states, particularly California, Illinois, and Pennsylvania. Carlson asserts that this undermines the political power of native-born citizens and could potentially sway presidential elections without sufficient legal safeguards or enforcement existing. Carlson highlights a growing racial and cultural hostility tied to the demographic changes, explaining that groups being displaced often face increasing discrimination and violence throughout history. He shares examples from Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Palestine to illustrate the grim patterns faced by former majority populations when they become minorities. He also explores an aspect of self-hatred among some white Americans, citing a controversial speech by Nancy Pelosi where she recounts her grandson wishing he had brown skin, framing it as symbolic of a fractured racial identity and contributing to the broader cultural conflict. The episode features a report from Nick Sorter, a freelance journalist, describing ongoing lawlessness in Minneapolis, where federal agents and ICE officers operate under constant threat, and law enforcement agencies stand down or fail to respond effectively. Sorter reports that rioters have impounded FBI vehicles and stolen automatic weapons without immediate police intervention, highlighting the erosion of order and the complicity or weakness of city leadership and police chiefs like Jacob Frey. This breakdown emboldens violent protesters and undermines federal operations. Pastor Joe Riggnney, connected to a Minneapolis church disrupted by anti-ICE activists, discusses the incident where the church service was overtaken by protesters accusing the congregation and their ICE officer member of complicity in oppression. Riggnney frames the protest as an intimidation tactic testing boundaries to silence opposition, rooted in bigger spiritual and cultural conflicts rather than mere political activism. He contextualizes the attack as a targeted assault on Christianity itself and calls for a rededication to faith and courage. Riggnney further elaborates the spiritual nature of the struggle, drawing parallels to the early Christian church's persecution in the Book of Acts. He views current events as a modern manifestation of that historic clash between faith and secular powers, encouraging believers to respond with boldness and joy amidst oppression. This spiritual framing presents the ongoing disorder as part of a larger cosmic battle, with Jesus as the sovereign ruler ultimately in control despite earthly chaos and persecution. Both Carlson and Riggnney emphasize that the present turmoil embodies a fundamental choice facing America: either a return to Christian principles bringing order and unity, or a continued descent into fragmentation, lawlessness, and violence born of tribalism and demographic conflict. Carlson underscores that political and demographic shifts are fueling a cycle of hatred and resentment, while Riggnney insists that faith and spiritual repentance are the only pathways to reconciliation and peace amid the escalating national crisis.